my name is Taylin, and I will be doing a analysis over the Zine Uncivilized for the English 2311 Summer 2 course for Texas Tech University. And my name is Taylin Peoples. Let's dive right in. So to introduce the Zine, Uncivilized is basically an informative Zine that focuses on providing critical perspectives on modern society and culture. This Zine is challenging our conventional norms, and it provokes thoughts within the reader, alternative viewpoints within the reader to emphasize the things that are not really spoken about in our academia or textbooks that we receive in our education. So it's basically just about providing a perspective of that our society is unsustainable with the civilization and the cultural norms that we have established. So the context of creation, it was published in 2014 in Internet Archives, although the actual publication or date that it was created was not on the Zine, so this is information I couldn't provide. But here at the bottom left, they provide a perspective as to why they are writing this and how they want their reader to interpret this information. Basically, they don't want to impress their opinions or perspectives onto the reader. They just want to provide this information so that the reader can make an informed decision on their viewpoints of this subject. So the authors and organizations, it's basically just a collective of people that share this same perspective, writing their own separate articles based off of the various topics and supporting historical moments. And they just put that together into one Zine, but the main article or author is Kevin Tucker. He was the only author that actually wrote his name on the Zine. So the Zine audience and their needs are young adults and activists. They're interested in alternative medias. They're seeking individuals with critical perspectives and expertise in areas that are involving social issues that you may not be able to find in mainstream areas. So that is their need, is to have a non-mainstream viewpoint and also an in-depth analysis of this topic. And also they need to have accessible and engaging content that can inspire them to take action and spread awareness to others. So the Zine's goals, their primary goals are to inform the readers about critical social and cultural issues, to inspire critical thinking and activism, and to provide a platform for marginalized voices. And the specific objectives are to highlight these issues of social justice, environmental sustainability or unsustainability, and our cultural critique. So critiquing the way that we, agricultural has domesticated us and how that is played out in our society. And it also encourages readers to question these societal norms that we have been born into and grew up in. So how this Zine attempts effective communication and meeting its audience needs is its engagement strategies. So it uses provocative headlines and visuals, like the visual that I used in the introduction slide was one of the first visuals that they used. And in this visual, you can kind of see the interplay between the divide in humans of the demands of the materialistic world versus, our natural pull towards the natural world. And so they used a lot of those visuals. They also used short poems as a way to just keep the reader engaged in the overall message that the Zine was attempting to provide. And so the articles are written, and they're written in simple language. So although their ideas and their concepts that they're trying to communicate are abstract and complex, they write it in such a way that makes it relatable. They create timelines and those pictures to correlate with it. And they also provided quotes from people that have spoken on this topic to kind of tie in together the overall context and message that they're trying to communicate. So effective and ineffective examples of scraps that I found was the first one being the size. An effective example would be each article began with a bold headlining followed by introductory and conclusion paragraphs, which help tie it together and help the reader to keep track of what article to continue on. And an ineffective example would be the disorganization of the context. It was really difficult for an online reader to understand, how to move throughout the pages. And so a revision of this would basically just be add page numbers and add a table of contents in the initial pages of design. So additionally, an effective example for contrast and clarity would be the simple, straightforward layout and the language, as well as the use of black and white contrast. Those do contrast well together, but unfortunately in this title page, which is my ineffective example of technology on industrialism, you can see here that it's not very effective in communicating that title with the background that they used. So they could have used a different picture, or they could have added color into that picture to make the lettering stand out a little bit more for the title. And so that would be my revision, is just use a different background color and to provide also footnotes detailing terms and jargon words, because there was a little bit of some jargon heavy terminology that I wasn't familiar with when I was reading through it, like totality can be used in different contexts, and Earth days was a completely unfamiliar term that I was not familiar with and that I had to look up in order to understand the overall context of that article. So adding those footnotes could be very helpful for the reader. So for repetition, there was a lot of repetition in the articles and in the messages that was being communicated to the reader. And they were able to accomplish that by repeating the same message throughout the articles and the poems and the quotes that they used. But an ineffective example of this would be off-topic information that distracts. So there was a personal reflection that was an initial article rather than the other articles that really communicated the message, that could potentially distract the reader. So how I would revise that is basically to either remove this personal reflection, or put it towards the bottom after the overall message has been communicated to the reader. So what I found for alignment, which I will show the examples of on the next slide, is there was an effective example of alignment with the poem that they used in the initial article, or one of the initial pages of the design, and it was all right aligned or left aligned, and you were really able to just see that it's a poem, and read it as just. And for an ineffective example, on page 6, there was a misalignment in a poem that they had. So what I would do to revise that is to right or left align these last two sentences, and so that they're all together. So I'll show you here. Here you can see an effective example is the timeline here. And they right aligned it and then left aligned the actual article itself so that you can clearly distinct between the two. But here, on the last two sentences on my right picture, they're right aligned rather than left aligned, in addition to all the other sentences that are left aligned. So that's what the change that I would make there, just to make it easier to read for the reader. For proximity, an effective example would definitely be the title pages. So you could get through the design by referencing the title pages as well as the fonts, because there was that disorganization. If you could keep track of the title and the context and the fonts, then you can kind of go through the online portion of it pretty well. But an ineffective example would be the so many mangono nuts. This was a title for one of the articles that really didn't have any relevancy to the article and the context in that article. In this article, I don't believe they mentioned mangono go nuts. So I would just change the title to nature-based way of life, a solution, which would be a more appropriate title for the context that was discussed. And you can kind of see that here. So the domestication, the title pages, they had 3 of those throughout design, and they kind of helped guide the reader through the different articles. And then right here on the right, you see the title, so many Mongonio nuts. But in the context, they mostly just talked about, you know, the poverty and the starvation in third world countries, and how having a nature-based lifestyle could help mitigate that. So finally, we have similarity. So the effective examples of similarity would be the continuous use of the title pages, which you can see here. And an ineffective example would be all the different fonts that they use for the different articles. So it made it really confusing, because like some fonts were in a certain article and they were also in another article, and so you would kind of get those 2 articles confused, or at least I did in my case. So what I would do is I would just change the fonts to be close to either be the same font throughout the design or be very similar throughout the design. So thank you so much for listening. I'm very happy to have done this analysis. This sign was very informative, and it was a really interesting research project and analysis to do over. So thank you so much, and farewell.